Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello, my name is Marcus Williams, and I'm here with co-host Brock Morris for another great episode of the Clean Library Podcast. Today we have special guest Thomas Holton. Thomas was born and lives in Ireland. He has degrees in taxation, social science, and international relations. He also has a professional certification in financial planning. He has tutored students in English, mathematics, writing, and taxation. He works as a senior manager in financial and legal administration. His health challenges over 27 years have taught him empathy and resilience. He is the author of 3 books, Alive in Christ, Cultivated in Christ, and Perfected in Christ. He runs YouTube channels and Facebook pages on Christian doctrine specific to his faith. He and his wife Veronica are the grateful parents of 1 married son. Thomas, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be with you today.
Excellent. Well, I think so far you are our guest from furthest away from where we are across the pond there. So welcome. We're glad we're able to make the time work. Before we jump into our discussion, we need to read your 2 truths and a lie, and I'll remind everyone where we're at. So Brock is ahead, 6-5. We make this a little contest. So we'll see how we do today. See how I get on. All right. Number 1, I swam in the cold waters of the North Atlantic on the coast of County Donegal, Ireland. Number 2, I completed a 25-kilometer, or 15 miles about, walk without stopping even once. And 3, I took the Amtrak train all the way from Chicago to San Francisco. So swimming in the North Atlantic, a 25-kilometer walk without stopping, and Amtrak from Chicago to San Francisco. So we'll try to see if we can figure those out, and at the end, both of us will take a guess and see if we can guess correctly which one is the lie. All right, so Thomas, from a English mathematics tutor and financial and legal admin, what inspired you to start writing these books?
So I've always really been interested in writing and in storytelling since I was a young child. And I used to write little stories when I was younger. They weren't very good, but they served as a source of inspiration to me. I remember writing a story about a superhero called Mighty Man and all his wonderful escapades in saving people from villains. As I got older, I realized I was really just copying Superman. And so my story wasn't very original. But as I look back, I think it served as a useful way of focusing my mind on the importance of stories and storytelling, especially stories that can inspire and that can uplift. And I always think there's a need for that. So really, that was the foundation for it as a little child, probably 4 or 5 years of age, when I saw Superman, the film, and when I wrote stories about Mighty Man, and they would encourage me to write. So that was really where I started to develop my interest. And then in terms of as I grew older, I continued to write in different ways about different things. And I suppose I had a very interesting experience about 10 years ago, just though actually it was longer than 10 years ago now, where I got really sick
Mm-hmm.
and I had emergency surgery for my bowel ruptured.
Mm.
And so I was very sick. I had emergency surgery, which meant that I needed to spend about a week in ICU and then about 5 or 6 weeks in a surgical ward. And during that time of my recovery, the psychologist said to me, um, that I was depressed, and then said to my wife, he's very depressed, which isn't unusual
Right.
uh, after major surgery like that, where I nearly died. So I decided, or my wife decided, that she would bring in my laptop and to me in the hospital, and I would watch Disney movies to
Hmm.
encourage me. But also, she suggested to me that I should really write my life history. And I had kept a journal when I was younger, but I'd sort of gotten away from that habit.
Yeah.
And then I thought that was a really good idea to write my life history. So I essentially did that in the hospital, sitting there each day, and made a record, a written record of all the experiences that I had throughout my life, and particularly those things that had happened to me which taught me a lesson or encouraged me or gave me a sense that I could keep living. So I suppose it was a way, it was sort of like therapy
Hmm.
without seeing a therapist. And so from that, I started to formulate this idea that I really needed to put this into a book, my experiences and the, the things I'd learned really about God and other things, about the important things in life. And so it was funny, I didn't actually migrate it into a book straight away. It was actually during COVID
Hmm.
that my employer said to me, go work from home. And I just found like because I didn't have to commute, I had lots of time on my hands.
Right.
And so I was really able to write. So I just determined, okay, I'm going to write a book. I've been talking about it for a long time, but I haven't done it. And so I spent a lot of effort writing my thoughts down and refining it and coordinating it. And then I reached out to a publisher in the States, and they were very excited with what I'd given the draft and said, yeah, we love this and we want to publish it. And so I was so surprised because for years, I suppose I thought, well, who wants to read anything that I have to say?
Yeah.
I'm just an ordinary person. My life doesn't really matter that much. But as I reflected on some of the things I'd written, I thought, well, actually, there is some useful information in here, some good stories. And so I was so happy when they published the book. And then I went on to publish two others, as you've said,
Yeah.
all by the same publisher. And
That,
so really I suppose it was just that experience of starting as a child to feel like writing is an important thing and telling stories and sharing experiences from your life that will give encouragement to other people, because most of us probably feel alone, probably feel like no one feels what I feel. But when you read something from somebody else, you start to think, well, other people feel the same way as I do. And I feel the same way they do. We just don't often talk about it.
yeah.
And so, really, all those things came together to encourage me to write, I suppose.
Awesome. You made an excellent point that there are others out there because while you were talking, I immediately thought of I've had Crohn's disease, if you're familiar with that, since I was 11 years old. So I got really sick when I was a kid. It took them a long time to diagnose it, but there was a point where I was essentially one unchewed piece of meat or corn away from having an emergency surgery as well. So my doctors, they went ahead and did that surgery. So luckily, gratefully, it wasn't an emergency in my case, but it could have been, and so we could compare scars. But like
Mm,
just having met you here, that resonates with me because I've been through something similar to that, and I think that's true. A lot of times we think we're alone, or we think that we're the only people who are going through certain trials or experiences, when there are actually a lot of people out there going through the same thing and looking for others, looking for examples or help or just validation that I can do this.
Yeah, I had the same thought, Marcus, as soon as you said that, Tom, when you said, who would want to read anything that I have written? And yet so much of what you shared, not necessarily of the same physical struggles, but the feeling depressed and needing to find a way to express yourself and sort of come back to yourself. And I thought, man, I would anybody who's willing to be vulnerable enough to put that in any form of writing, you connect with immediately. And so, yeah, I felt the same thing as you were sharing that. I had a question too when you talked about when you were running or writing about Mighty Man. Did you have a lot of support from family or friends and an encouragement? Do you feel like if you did, that had an impact on your confidence when you went to actually start writing more as you were older?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. I think, um, and this is something you learn as you get older, that you have to be discerning about whose advice and counsel you listen to. My mother was always very supportive. Um, she was very encouraging from the outset, even though, of course, the quality of my writing was it needed a lot of work. Let's put it that way. Um, but there were some others that probably weren't as encouraging, and that's just an inevitable part of life because sometimes I think we speak out of fear. We sort of speak out of scarcity, a scarcity mentality. And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily that people are malicious, it's just sometimes we doubt. And so sometimes we worry. We don't give the encouragement to other people that we could. So I would always say that I started off very hesitant. I had probably more confidence than ability, to be honest. And I think that's probably no harm because if you try something, you're going to get better. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I would certainly say to people be discerning and be selective about whose counsel you listen to. I think it's important to listen to people who encourage us and not just feed the doubter within all of us because doubt is easy and we all have reasons to be skeptical and they're very easy to see. Anybody can tell you why you're not going to succeed, but it is important to listen to people that will tell you you can. I don't think that's naive. I think it's just putting your trust in someone who really loves you. Even if you're not the best writer in the world, and I'm not famous for my writing, very few people will know what I've written. But I think it's the principle of the thing that if you have that confidence to put your thoughts on paper, that there is merit in that, even if lots of people don't see it. There is merit. It's a worthwhile project to engage in.
Absolutely, beautifully
Yeah.
said. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that goes for writing and really anything else. There's a difference between when you meet people who say, "Yeah, I can do that," because they have confidence in themselves that even if they've never been trained, they'll figure it out. They want to dive in and try to learn as much as they can and figure out whether it's fixing cars or cooking or writing. That it's in without the attitude of I can do it and it's okay if I'm not good at it to start with. You'll never be able to accomplish anything if you don't have that attitude.
Yeah.
So now, most of the people we talk to who have been traditionally published that submitted their manuscript to dozens and dozens of agents and publishers, and it sounds like you hit the jackpot on your first submission. Was there a reason why you chose a publisher in the States rather than a local one in Ireland?
Well, the primary reason was because of the content I was writing about. I mean, obviously it's Christian background and there is more receptivity in the States than there is in Europe. And I don't mean that as a denigration to people in Europe, but just there's more what I suppose I would call there's more receptivity to religious stories and to the religious
Okay.
narrative. Probably because for years in Europe, religion has been seen as something you're compelled to do, um, whereas in the States you're free
Yeah.
to do it. So it takes on a different it's a different context really. So yeah, I chose the States. The plus of course the publisher I went to, I had a good reputation, was able to convince me that they would be able to distribute the book in a way that I thought would be conducive to getting the message out. So there are various other factors. I found them actually
Yeah.
very receptive and to have a very much a can-do attitude. And sometimes people might scoff at that, but I actually think that's really important because we already have enough inhibitions and doubts and worries without that being compounded by, trying to launch a project with someone who's doubtful. So they were very willing and receptive. So I was just impressed by that. I thought it was really helpful.
That's great. And it's Cedar Fort Publishing, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in
Yeah.
Utah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great people. Actually, last summer, I'm involved in community theater, and we did Oliver last summer, the musical, and the founder of Cedar Fort Publishing and his son, who is the current CEO, were both in the show. So I got to know them. Great people, really great people.
Yeah.
So, kind of going back to the original inspiration and being in the hospital, I imagine laying there and making an effort to really focus on, like, reflect on your life and think back over the lessons you've learned in your life. That had to have been a pretty powerful experience for you.
Yeah, it definitely was. And of course, my mind and heart were particularly focused because of the experience I'd gone through, very painful, um, quite intimidating, new terrain. I had been sick for quite a while, but this was really much more pronounced. But definitely, it gave me an opportunity to really reflect. And I am very reflective as a person. And of course, that's usually said
Hmm.
about writers that writers, before they write, they observe. And I think we can't overestimate the importance of that, the importance of observing, of watching what's going on around you. Human nature is everywhere, and there are so many lessons to be learned if we open up our eyes and our hearts and see them. So while I was in the hospital, I was listening carefully to what was going on around me and what other people their experiences they were having, but also I was reflecting on the events that happened in my own life, not just in terms of what happened factually, but what those events signify, what they actually mean. Because sometimes we just pass through events, but other times we pass through and we start to reflect and ponder and think. And we start to think, well, this event has significance beyond probably what I've assumed. I haven't really fully explored what this means for me as a person. Why did this happen? Why did it happen at this time? What lessons can I learn? What principles can I incorporate into my life as a result of this? So, yeah, I did a lot of that reflecting and writing and thinking. And I think writing for me is a way of clarifying what I actually think. Because sometimes we don't know what we think about something until we're probing it. And so for me, it was really interesting to do that. And I
Yes.
just covered every scenario that I could think of, not not small events, but what I regarded as significant events, my education, my family, my religious experiences, my relationships were very important. So all of those sorts of things, what faith meant to me, the significance of my faith, not just as someone who paid attention to it, but someone who was transformed by it. And so all of those sorts of things, that really inspired me because I came away feeling like, oh yeah, there is something here. There's a kernel of truth. There are lessons to be learned. There are principles that are useful not just to me, but I believe to other people. And so just it was a wonderful opportunity to have that, to reflect, even though it was painful. I often think some of the most important
Yeah.
experiences we have are disruptive. They breach our expectations, and that's why they're so important. So it really taught me a lot.
Yeah. And most of us don't ever, like, it's difficult to find that just dedicated time that you need to really go that deeply in reflection and thinking. And not that you would wish to have that experience or wish it upon anyone, but that really gave you the time to do that and take that really deep dive into your experiences in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we're prompted, prompted in the sense of we have these emergencies or tragedies or breached expectations that compel us to reflect on why, what's the meaning of the stories of our lives. And sometimes we can elect, instead of being prompted by tragedy, we can elect to say, well, okay, let me ponder a bit about why I'm going through this, or what's the meaning of it, what's the significance of it. And so obviously it's preferable to elect to do it rather than waiting for
Right.
some massive tragedy to happen. But as human beings, we have both of those. We're going to be educated by things that just happen unexpectedly that we haven't wished for. And the thing is to try and use that as an educational opportunity. And so this, what would we be if we didn't have books, if we didn't have stories, if we didn't have lessons to learn? Um, Life would be far poorer than it is. So there's so much, I often think to myself, there's so many books in the world that have never been published because they're still in the hearts and the minds of people who experience them. They just haven't been articulated yet. I would love to have an
Hmm.
opportunity to sit down with people and just say, tell me about your life. And then we'd see, oh, wow, everyone has a life story. Everyone has a story worth telling. That sounds
Yeah.
like a cliche in a way, but I really believe it's true. So wonderful experiences to have, painful, sometimes joyful, but they both teach us.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Tom. And what came out to me in what you were just saying is there's so much courage. There's so much courage in writing your story and your experiences down, especially the hard ones. Just like you said, even in a journaling standpoint, right? To sit down and really dissect what experiences you've had and trying to think through how it impacted you and how it impacted the people around you. Even just that, then it's a whole nother level to put that into a book that you then decide, I would like to share this with the world, and the vulnerability and the courage that that takes, I think is another level. And yet those are the books so oftentimes we're drawn to. Is there something what do you think helped you sort of overcome that, what could have been the fear of putting yourself out there like that, and just decided that you would take the leap, and the courage that it took to write that and then publish it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly for a long time, I had that desire to actually publish a book. And I had questions about whether it would be a story, because I've written lots of stories over the years, whether it would be a story or whether it would be more, nonfiction, but not a story in that sense, where it would just be descriptive. And what I did in essence was I combined both. So in the books that I've written, there are some stories, some which are true, which actually happened, some which are legend in the sense of they didn't actually happen, but they teach a purpose, they teach a message, even though they didn't
Hmm.
actually happen. But what you've said there is really interesting. It's a prompt. I think for me, in the background of my mind and heart, I had this desire to write, but I was definitely reluctant at times, self doubt, and also busyness. And in a way, that was true. And in some ways, it's an excuse. It's sort of, well, I'm so busy doing other things. And of course, we all have time, but it's what we use it for. It's what we focus on is the important thing, because we always have time to do the things that are really important. I think if we really say, okay, look, this is core, this is critical, this is not just urgent, but this is vital that I do this. So I got to that point where I realized, okay, I need to take the leap here, regardless of what the outcome is. I need to be true to that desire that I have to make it happen. And I think that's important breakthrough moment for me. And I think it's probably the same with everyone, that we just come to that point where we say, okay, look, this is a do or die moment. I'm going to do this or I'm not. I'm going to climb Mount Everest, or I'm going to ask that girl to go on a date, or whatever it is. That big thing that we're fearful and we're avoiding because we know we're afraid, and we sometimes like to be more comfortable. We prefer to be comfortable than we do to take a risk, because taking a risk is
Hmm.
hard. But I do believe
Right.
each of us comes to that point where we just say, okay, I really need to do this, and I'm not going to let anything stop me, whether it's my own weakness or the negativity of others or situational factors, because situations will never be ideal. I've come to that conclusion. Circumstances will never say, okay, look, there's always going to be a challenge, because even when I was writing during COVID, I had lots of free time, but it was still a challenge. I still had to dig deep and explore things that I hadn't actually explored, which was really an education to me. So I suppose to sum up, I'd say that we need to face it. I suppose we need to be able to look in the mirror, if you like, and be authentic and say, okay, is this thing really important to me? Is writing a book really important? Why am I doing it? What's the motive? And if it is important, then I'm going to do it. I had that conversation and I came to the conclusion that this was not something I should just do for myself, but I should do it for the benefit of other people. That might seem pompous, but in a sense, I felt like if it's going to be truly meaningful, it has to matter as well to other people. And I found that through
Hmm.
my writing. I've been surprised sometimes at people who would say, "Oh, wow, this is wonderful that you've written this book. I really love it." And that has reminded me that we need to let our talents out. We need to let our light shine, not just so we'll feel happier, but so other people can gain that sense of permission. Permission maybe is the wrong word, but encouragement. They can gain a sense of encouragement that, okay, this person's living according to their dream. I'm going to do the same thing. It's almost as if we're looking around us, and we're hoping that other people will be a light and an example and encourage us to dig deep and be brave and be courageous and be all the things we need to be. So I think that's part of the messaging that I would like to share, that we need to encourage each other. If someone wants to dance, let's encourage them to learn how to dance, or, whatever it is, because you won't know what you're good at until you try. So it sounds obvious in a way when I say it now, but we have to, I think, face some demons to say, okay, I'm going to confront these enemies inside of
Yeah.
me and some of the skeptics around me, and just do it.
Yeah. And I think that's when you're talking about making that choice of what is important and what is vital. Um, I think we can't overemphasize that, because as soon as you do that, as soon as you make that choice that this is vital, so that you're taking personal responsibility. You're getting rid of any excuses, you're getting rid of environment and circumstances, and you're saying this is on me, and I'm choosing to do this because I feel it's important, and there's no one else has any control over it because I've made this choice.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's the power that we have in us to make that decision. And I realize that's a personal thing for each person. And I would always encourage people to do it, to say, okay, what's your ambition? Have the ambition that you can achieve something. And, even if you never become well known, or, those things are secondary, they don't really matter. What matters is that you are exploring your talents, your gifts, your abilities, your ambitions in a way that is encouraging to the people around you. I think that's really what matters. And of course, as you know, the books are about Christ. And in my view, Christ is the ultimate example. He encourages us to be better than we were. And not in a condescending way, but in an encouraging, supportive way. And that for me it's so important to have that idea that we have a belief in Christ, Christ as an encourager, as a teacher, and a teacher teaches by example. So I suppose that's what I'm saying, that whatever we want to do in life
Hmm.
that's good, that's clean, we can do it with Christ's help, of course. But we have the power. we have the capacity to do it if we believe.
Yeah. And that's the power of faith. That's the power of, no matter what the specifics are of your beliefs, but having faith in something greater than yourself, having faith in Christ, or having faith in something, is what allows you to see yourself as more than you are. If that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fantastic. Excellent advice. And I think um, a lot of the authors that we've talked to here on the show, and just in general, there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of, am I good enough? Is anybody going to like this? And I love the fact that you say that's secondary. That's not that's not the important thing to focus on. Focus on the story that you have to tell. Focus on the reason you're writing the story, whether it's a fictional story or whether it's based on your life. It doesn't matter. It's a story that you feel compelled to tell for one reason or another.
Yeah, be true to
And in
yourself
a
in that,
way,
right? Do that for you. Yeah.
sorry, I
Go
know
ahead.
you
You're
wanted to
good.
say something, Brock, but
You're good.
just that thought that you said, Marcus, really inspired me, because this idea that I think you have to, I think you have to write the story. When I say story, I mean y- there's something in you that has to come out, and you don't want to bury that, because that's what it means to die in a way. I mean, if you don't want to die with your story inside of you, is what I'm thinking, or your music inside
Mm-hmm.
of you, or your art, or whatever it is. So just what you said there reminded me of that idea that to be alive is important, but it's not enough. You've got to live your life. We don't just want to
Yeah.
exist, we want to live. And that means, in my view, that means that there's something personal that you need to discover about your life that's unique and special to you. And you need to show it forth. It's not enough to feel it, but you want to let it out there. So sorry, Brock,
Mm-hmm.
I interrupted you, but I just wanted to make that point. It just inspired me to say that. So
No, you were spot on, and I think you just brought something else to my mind, which is so many of the authors that we've spoken to, and I think this starting to sound like this is a vein that runs through most authors is you feel called to tell a story too, right? There's something, I don't care if it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever it is, you feel inside of you this desire, this calling to write about that and to get it out there. And like you said, don't hold that in. To you if you have something to offer, and again, like you said, it goes outside of writing as well, but be true to
Mm-hmm.
yourself and to get that out there for the world, and have integrity to who you want to be. And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about that, of all the books that I've published, fiction, nonfiction, the one that was probably the hardest for me to push publish was the book of poetry. And it's poems that I wrote when I was a young man, like college age, but those are probably the most personal out of all the writing, the most, I don't know, but probably shows more of who I was at the time. And so that was the most
yeah,
difficult one, even though it was already written. I'd written it 20 years ago. I was just putting it together in a book form. Yeah, that just reminded me of that, and maybe why that was.
that's really interesting, because each of my books, well, two of the three have poems in them, personal poems that I've written. So I concur with what you've said there, because when you're writing poetry, it can be understood on many levels, obviously. That's sort of part of the terrain, and the truly meaningful poetry speaks to your heart and nature and the deepest recesses of your soul. So when I put those poems, and some of the poems I've written were pretty mundane, but some of them are
Hmm.
really reflective of the deepest struggles I've had and also the greatest triumphs. And I think it showcases both. And so, yeah, I would very much align with that to share your poetry with the world is a brave move, because you realize, okay, I'm exposing myself here to what I
Right.
really feel, not the thoughts and feelings that other people think you might have, because all of us have an inner life that we don't really share with other people, because it just wouldn't be appropriate in most settings to do that. But with that
Right.
poetry, I feel exactly the same way. I shared some feelings and thoughts which were deep, deep, deep to me. So, yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. And
Well, now you both have me thinking, never having written anything before. Is there something that I need to dig into? Is there a poem I need to write or a story I need to write that I've been ignoring and I need to get out there? There's a lot of introspection, I think, that's going to come out of this conversation, which I appreciate, but I'm a little scared of, to be honest with you.
Good. That's a good sign. You're on
yeah.
the right track.
Yeah. We'll see. Thank you, though. Yeah,
We're pushing you towards it there, Brock.
absolutely.
um, so you wrote more fictional stories in your youth. Do you have a novel in the future that you want to write?
Potentially, I definitely I have some potential ideas, but migrating it into actuality is the big challenge. Um, so yeah, I mean, for me, life is a story, and
Hmm.
life is a drama. So it's how we tell each other what matters through stories, and the core stories are universal. We all know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something I need to ponder on and see what I have inside of me in terms of a story that might be workable. Probably a short story or a collection of stories would probably
Hmm.
work best. But it's certainly something that's on my radar, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. That reminds me of a couple other conversations we've had where, and our conversation here, that everyone has a story that needs to be told. We've talked to a few authors who were inspired by their ancestors, and whether it's a journal entry they found or a newspaper clipping, and that life of an actual person, an ancestor, is what inspired a story. Um, and maybe it's a fictional story based around that ancestor or that time period, or maybe it was telling the actual story of the ancestor. But I think sometimes the responsibility is to tell the story of the person who didn't get a chance to, who didn't have that opportunity when they were alive.
I love that. I really love that idea, because in Ireland we have a very strong tradition of being storytellers,
Yeah.
and musicians and artists, and there's a large focus on the oral tradition of music, of storytelling, of relating tales to each other, and that gives us a sense of, well, it gives us a sense of origin, but also of legacy, of destiny. And so I definitely feel like some of the things I've been talking about are actually messages of people that came before me, my family,
Hmm.
that for various reasons wouldn't have had necessarily an opportunity to write a book per se, in a situation where maybe that wouldn't have been possible or feasible. But the stories are resonating down through the ages. So we're obviously not just ourselves, we're a collection of many people that have gone before. We have their genetics, but not just their genetics. We have their faith, we have their beliefs coming through us. So I think that's a beautiful idea. The idea that we're telling stories from others who have impacted us but haven't been able to tell their story, and we give voice to that. I think that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. My wife has traced her genealogy. She has a side of the family from Ireland, and I think she's gotten as far as she can get without us actually going. So hopefully in
Oh,
the
you
near
have to
future
come. You have to come.
we'll be there.
Ireland is an amazing place. And I think everyone who comes here, they feel that, especially if they take the time to imbibe the traditions and the stories and the music, and there's an atmosphere here that it's hard to
Yeah.
articulate, but there's definitely something that people come to experience when they come to Ireland and see the sights, and when they talk to the people, because Irish people are very welcoming and very friendly, and they have a story to tell. So
Hmm.
that's how we communicate what's important to us. So yeah, definitely encourage you to come. You won't regret it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully soon. All right. Well, I wish this conversation would never end. It's been so wonderful, but we are running out of time. So we need to wrap up and get back to the two truths and a lie and see if we can figure those out. We've gone through a lot of material, but I don't think we've covered swimming in the North Atlantic yet. So let me remind everybody what those three were, and then Brock will take his guess. So number one, I swam in the cold waters of the North Atlantic on the coast of County Donegal, Ireland. Number two, I completed a 25-kilometer walk without stopping even once. And number three, I took the Amtrak train all the way from Chicago to San Francisco. All right, Brock, what do you think?
I'm a little tripped up by this because swimming in the North Atlantic, because it's there in Ireland, it would be an immediate one that you'd think that would be a truth. But I'm almost thinking you use that as a way to trip us up a little bit. But ultimately, I'm going to go with that the lie is the Amtrak train ride from Chicago to San Francisco. But that's I don't really have a lot of reason why, other than I'm just throwing that in there.
Okay, well, I think the only someone not from the U.S. would take an Amtrak from Chicago to San Francisco.
That's logical. That's a really good point. I'm second guessing my guess now, but yeah.
Not a popular form of travel, although maybe there is a lot of talk about bringing back the railroad here. Okay, so my guess would be, whew, yeah, it's kind of a shot in the dark here. I think swimming in the North Atlantic has got to be just a rite of passage, a little bit. So I'm going to go with number two. The walking for 15 miles without stopping is the lie. Did either of us get it?
Okay, so the lie was the Amtrak.
Oh, yes.
Ah,
I was
So
going to drop a
actually,
question earlier, yeah,
it,
about that to
it
say
it
that would make a great story, but
it is an interesting one. So we did actually take the Amtrak from Chicago all the way to Salt Lake, but we didn't follow on to San Francisco. So that was my wife and I. So it actually took 33 hours each way. We went there and back. And it was
wow.
amazing because it's something I'd always wanted to do, to go on the Amtrak through the Rockies. And if you've never done it, it's a worthwhile experience. They have a wonderful glass ceiling
yeah,
viewing carriage that you can look out as you're going over, the Rockies, the plunge, and it's just amazing to see, amazing. So, yeah, I have
that's cool.
swum in Donegal, the North Atlantic, and that water is really cold. I can tell you, it's
Yeah,
cold,
yeah,
but you really feel alive after that experience. And
I'll
then the
bet.
second one about the walking, yes, I did walk 15 miles. It took 4 hours and 15 minutes. And
Wow.
for about half of it, my body was screaming at me, saying, "You have no right to do this to me." So,
But
quite an
All right.
experience.
I think I get so excited that my answer got picked that I forget that that actually means that I lose. So, so I think it's tied up now.
Well, you picked that as the lie, and that was the lie because
Oh, I did pick that as
he
a
took it
lie
to Salt
because
Lake.
you only went
Yeah, he took
to,
it to
yeah,
Salt
yeah,
Lake,
yeah.
not to
Yeah, I
yeah.
got
So
confused there
you
for a
are
minute.
up.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
Steve says it's now 7-5. All right, you're taking a commanding lead here. That's okay.
I'm pulling
All
away.
right. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for being on the show. We're so great we're able to make it happen. It was a really inspiring conversation, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for being on the show.
My privilege. my absolute honor.
And thank you for listening or watching. Please subscribe, please share, follow whatever service you are watching or listening on. We really appreciate it. Share with your friends. And if you are an author of clean books or a narrator of clean books or someone who is in that space, we would love to hear from you as well. So thank you again for being with us on the Clean Library Podcast.